Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the third session of day 3 of LTDX 21. My name is Andrew Jacobs, and I'm moderating, hosting, working my way through the sessions with you this morning. Really keen to get into this session, looking at the purpose of skills with GlaxoSmithKline and Filtered. And delighted to be able to introduce Toby Harris from Filtered and Martin Peart from GlaxoSmithKline, who are going to be running the session for us this morning. A couple of points about the session. This one's highly interactive, so you will need to use the chat. And nice to see Toby's already put in the chat, and Den has also put in the hat as in the chat as well, I should say. We will be using the chat. We will also be using the questions as well. So please make sure that you put your questions in there, so we can pick up on those. Also, if you are tweeting anything about the sessions, please use the hashtag LTDX21. And we'll look out for any tweets that you have out there as well. But you don't want to hear from me. You've come to this session because I, like everybody else, I want to understand this reskilling issue that we've got going on. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Martin and to Toby.
Thank you very much, Andrew, for the really warm intro. Appreciate it. I think we'll just start off just by saying a few words about ourselves and how we're involved in this kind of question. And I'll put you on the spot. You can go first. Tell us who you are and what you were doing and what you're currently doing, I guess, is the best way to approach this.
Thanks, Toby. My background is actually in transformation, system and process-based transformation, and more recently, probably about 5 years ago, moved into a broader learning and development role, looking at not just technical skills, but leadership skills, professional skills. And most recently, focusing on leadership development, team performance. And I'm currently 3 weeks into a new role, which I'm still getting my head around, but is focusing more on skills for our new consumer healthcare organisation.
It's a huge amount of relevant experience here, and I'm really looking forward to the insight you can share on some of the questions that we're looking at. And I'm Toby. I'll be asking and answering and doing some of the discussion for the questions we're covering today. I'm Director of Product Marketing at Filtered, and as many of you will know, Filtered really specialises in understanding skills, understanding how content and other things are linked to them, and trying to make that connection, getting the right content linked to the right skills in front of the right people. But I'm humble in front of people like Martin, who have real world experience of just how difficult this is to do, and I'm grateful that we've been able to work together on some stuff to explore these difficult challenges. All of the questions here are really open to the audience as well. So Andrew's going to, as a moderator, is going to be pinging me and Martin the text of the stuff that you're saying in the chat, and we'll try and respond to it because, let's be honest, there isn't really the robust level of research or knowledge about what we're doing with skills, particularly the way it's changed in the past few years. So this is definitely an open question for everyone, and it's going to be a collaborative experience, try and get to a model for the purpose of skills and what we do with them. But Martin, the first question, I think it's just useful to start with this. Please, can you try and define for me and everyone actually, how do you define a skill? There's so many ways to define it. How do you do it?
Yeah, there definitely are. And it's taken me a while to get to a point where I'm actually able to express it, I think. But I think at a really simple level, it is a skill is something which allows you to complete a task or an activity. And I think that's applicable to everyday life. I think probably the context of the conversation today will be more around work and careers. I think that if you roll that up as well, from an organisational perspective, it's about how organisations are actually able to achieve their objectives and to grow. If that is one of them.
And is there a difference between being able to do something in terms of like a task that you need to do and being able to perform something on a regular basis, like an activity, like something that's more habitual?
Yeah, I think there is. And I guess some examples of that, if I think about my everyday working life, um, I am a intermediate or average is probably a better word user of Excel. And whenever I need to do pivot tables, I still need to go and get a little bit of help from an online course somewhere. Just 2.5 minute video that allows me to remember how to do the pivot tables that I only really do once or twice a month. And that's quite different actually. If I think about some of the more important development for me, I need to focus on longer term. Storytelling actually is something I've been trying to work on over the past year or so, and that will be continuous. It will not just involve watching a 2.5 minute video, it'll be more around actually applying it, probably taking some feedback from other people on how I've been doing with it, and looking at the different aspects and the context in which I need to apply it.
Well, firstly, well done for admitting you still need help with Excel in a live forum broadcast to so many people that's going to be recorded. I actually think it's genuinely important that you did that, because there's something here about understanding where things are critical to a role and actually they need to occupy headspace for the individual concerned. Like your example of storytelling. How good am I at doing this? Am I getting better at it? And then there's other things that could fit into skills for the category of skills for some people. So let's say you're a Power BI analyst, then I think your Excel skills are like mega important. But for many of us, are things we can sort of leave in external memory banks. So there's something here about making skills, getting to the core of what's important. And I think Ross Stevenson has come in to kind of give us a definition of skill equals technical competence, but then behavior equals everyday habit. So maybe it's behavior. Maybe that's what you should be thinking about as well. I don't know how you respond to that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the classic approach that an L&D professional would take would be to look at skills and knowledge and behaviour in terms of any kind of development that you'd be looking for from individuals. So I think, I absolutely agree with that.
And there's another question, a more challenging one. So from Catherine, about on the basis of your definition of a skill as something that enables a person to complete a task, how would you differentiate a skill from a tool? I like this one. I've got my own answer on it. It might be quite a punchy one, but you go first, Martin.
Yeah. I'll give it a whirl, Toby. Thanks for putting me on the spot first there. So I think I think if the skill is how it's done, and the tool is what might be used to do it, I guess would be the difference I would probably apply to it. And by the way, just to kind of additional to that as well, what I've come to realize over the past few years is that there are lots of different definitions of what are skills, what are behaviors, where the tools fit into it. And I think that's all completely fine. I think the important thing is when you're leading on a piece of work around this, that you and all of your stakeholders that you're working with, that you are all reasonably aligned around what skills are, what behaviors are, what tools might be, and because they honestly differ from organization to organization.
Yeah, that's very true. One person's tool is another person's skill in a different organization. But I think what you said, and I think Adrian's come in to kind of highlight this in his reply in a way, is that there is a sharp difference, I think, between a skill and a tool, because a tool may be an enabler to deliver a task, and we know that tools kind of change our ability to do things, but the assumption that the object is doing anything is deeply troubling. I find you don't put tools in front of people and that magically allows them to get a job done. We see this, I've seen this time and time again, and I think it's a real issue actually with the kind of some of the performance consulting approaches we take, where we look and think, oh, what these people need is a checklist, and we put the checklist in, job done. They don't need a skill, they need a checklist. And then we watch as people don't use the checklist. People ignore it, they put it in a drawer. A big example of this, like showering iPads onto let's say nursery or childcare workers, and then watch as they don't use them, and all of the data that was being shared with parents just dries up. So we can't just say a tool, you need a tool to get a job done, but unless that tool actually changes what's in your brain and there's some skill development there, it doesn't really work.
Yeah,
there's now go ahead, sorry, Martin.
I was gonna say I agree, and I think around that it comes back to when you look at skills development or implementing new tools, you need to look at it holistically. So, does the individual have the appropriate time and space to learn the new skill or to learn how to use the new tool? Is there a system or an infrastructure in place that allows them to do it and sometimes gives them the guide rails to actually use it as well?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of stuff coming through, which is from David Dunn on the chat, which is really relevant to our next point. So I think maybe you can factor in some of the stuff that's being said here, because we're talking now about really, I guess, data about skills. Accept that building skills is quite difficult and takes time and requires, as you said, knowledge, behavior, tools, and kind of the systems to support that, to make that happen. Then how on earth do you prioritize them, Martin? How do you do it? I think this is one of the issues, and I've seen loads of solutions to it. Like, one really interesting solution is just pick 5 where you've got a good intuition, you need them, and get started and learn from there. Or the opposite approach, which is bringing a big consultancy, is going to spend 6 months coming up with a comprehensive framework. So how do we do it? Or more specifically, how do you do it?
Yeah, so I put 3 different lenses on prioritizing skills. And I think that depending on the type of organization you're in, and probably the size as well to an extent, may influence how you go about it and the problem you've got to solve. If I think strategically is one lens, what are the priority skills strategically that the organization wants their employees to be focusing on, would be one way to do that. I think there's another lens around if it's a specific project or a specific problem, which isn't enterprise-wide or organization-wide. What are the specific skills you might want there for that particular group of people you're working with to develop? And I think from an individual perspective, there's also priority skills that individuals may want to work on. And sometimes those individual skills may be aligned to the strategic skills, may be aligned to a particular problem or a project which is being worked on, and actually might not be either. My skills development around storytelling, for example, that's not necessarily something which features on our strategic skills at GSK at the moment specifically. So that, I think that would be the 3 lenses that I've come to put on prioritization.
I think those lenses do make a lot of sense. I think this is a question from Andrew himself. So has there been an issue of urgency over importance because of the pandemic when you're prioritizing skills? So, and gives the example, in March last year, it was all about learning how to use Teams, Zoom, or Skype. And I guess underlying that is, like, have we actually been, how does this model help us solve that? Because have we maybe been neglecting stuff that is important for the organization because of things that seem really, really urgent to develop, and redirecting all our efforts there in terms of prioritization? So I think we might have lost Martin briefly. So while he comes back, I'll try and answer Andrew's question myself, based on our experience. I don't think that this has been an issue in the way that you're suggesting in a big way, because actually they coincide so much. You know, the urgency of developing some of these skills, namely communicating digitally, is going to be important to at all of Martin's levels, at individual effectiveness, at projects, and strategically. And I think it's also created more time, more airtime in the organization for skills, more bandwidth, more investment opportunities to kind of build content or develop courses that generate that are generative of new skills. So I don't think it's too it's too much of an issue, and if anything, it might be an unlocker. You know, it might have liberated us to think really hard about skills. And I just, while I'm here, I just wanted to come back to another point that David made about identifying skills, basically redoing competency frameworks, has little value without connecting to opportunities. I think that's a very good point. And I think, again, Martin's model of looking at what is strategically important, what is important at a project level, and what is important at the individual level does help with that. An individual is likely to develop a skill or skills which are linked to the immediate opportunities that they have in sight, you know, the stuff that's in role, the stuff that's changing. A team is going to be likely to need certain skills to realize an opportunity that's ahead of them. And strategically, you know, there's corporate opportunities. The one warning I would say is, if you sell people the idea of skill development on new opportunities, you might find yourself in a pretty tricky HR situation, because you know, we could be talking about a 1 to 2 year lag to develop a major new skill for someone. And so you can't go around offering gigs and opportunities and new jobs to everyone in the company all the time. Like, that's an important part of HR. But I think always having a hard link between skills and opportunities might miss some of the aspect of developing potential for the future. Martin, you're back. I'm not sure how much you caught of that, but maybe this question about maybe opportunities are the key to prioritizing skills more than anything else. Okay, still struggling. I'll kind of I'll move on. I'm sure he'll be back. This is the kind of internet stuff that happens when you're trying to do this. So the next point we have here is about which we'll get to is kind of linking skills to content, and where the content comes into this equation. And this is some work we did specifically with Martin and GSK on trying to understand how some priority skills were linked to the content they had. And I want to kind of open this up, because I feel like this challenge of linking skills to content is something that almost gets in the way. It's something that maybe isn't highest value compared to as Andrew, you're saying about ensuring there's ongoing on-the-job practice and getting to behavior change. And yet that content question just seems to be bugging us all the time. What libraries do we have? How are they matched against the skills we're trying to prioritize? Oh, they all have different skill frameworks linked to them. They all have different ontologies, or whatever you want to call them. So it seems to be an issue. From Natalia, that idea about ongoing practice. So I'm going to be asking Martin when he's back about what his approach was to linking skills to actual content and dealing with that content problem. But I wonder if this might be a moment for people to share in general whether what is the relationship between skills and content. You know, we know that I feel like content does play an important role to develop a skill. You know, like if you want to share knowledge or share techniques or theory, you need some form of digital content, but maybe it gets too much of an emphasis in the overall picture. But yeah, and I'll leave some time if anyone wants to come in to the chat, but obviously no worries if you don't. And Martin's back again.
Hopefully I'm back for good this time, Toby.
So we've just moved on to this question of how do you link how do you link skills to content, and we're also talking about what is the content problem that you had to face at GSK, and how did skills help you to solve it? What was the technique there?
Yeah. So first of all, after you've identified the right skills, technically linking the content, you might use a number of different platforms to do that and to make it available. But I think the really key thing that we certainly went through was, I was approaching it from a strategic perspective. So, what is the skills framework that we want to have at GSK, and what are the components of that in terms of what the organisation needs, future needs, individual needs, and then we had a number of different content libraries and partners that we worked with. And what was a really clear learning for me is, I think at day one when we launched the framework, I think I had something like 70 or 80,000 content items available across the different partners we were working with, or well-known partners that people will be familiar with. And I very quickly heard back as we launched and we were testing and we were iterating with our employees. I heard back that there was too much content. It was just too much. It was actually overwhelming. So I think for us, we started to look at that manually and looking at where we could improve that. I had some difficult nights in front of spreadsheets, looking down the lines and looking at the relevant content or the non-relevant content and kind of putting a tick or a cross next to it. But then I think actually the realization was, and I think when we started to work with you guys a little bit, was there's better ways to do it. And I think looking at how you can start to use some of the technology and the algorithms that are available now to be able to focus on the right pieces of content for the different skills. And I think the other learning was it is different for different areas. Something like communication is a huge area, and you may want to break that down into smaller chunks. Then there are much more specific skills which are much smaller, and you can actually just have maybe 5-10 pieces of content per language.
So this really ties in with what Ross Stevenson has said, which is the goal has to be about connecting people with the right stuff, not more stuff. And there's a general sense here of like throwing lots of flashy content doesn't mean that people are developing a skill. And actually, what you're saying is the complexity or importance of the skill is almost like an index for how much content you need. Because if you're breaking out communication into lots of different types of communication that all apply differently, that becomes a bigger content challenge. Whereas if it is a skill that's less important, people really they'd want the top 5 resources. They don't want the top 500 resources in that area.
Very, very much so. And I think sometimes you have to go through a period of iteration with it. So, I had SMEs who had a view on the content. We brought in employees as well to give us a view on that. So you've got both of those lenses as you'd always hope to have. But ultimately, until people start using it, you don't always have a feel about whether you've got the right content. And I think it probably took maybe 2-3 iterations quarterly until I feel like we actually were on the money with the volume that we had for each of the different skills that we curated against.
Yeah. That's really important. Don't make the decision in an ivory tower and then push it down, but actually iterate and get feedback on the ground. People are good at telling you what's useful and what isn't, if you're just able to listen to them or willing to. There's some questions and points coming in about, content is often only the precursor to a journey. We don't map consumer content to skill development. And there's a question about impact that I want to get to later, where we can address that question. But I wanted to come on to this. You've mentioned that very, very large numbers to me, Martin, about the amount of content that you actually have available. to you in a company of your scale. What has the experience of like filtering all of this stuff, understanding it, and then trying to get it into action, what has that taught you about how you look at a content library, and what's kind of changed in your approach or your thinking about them?
So I think the bit for me is around, first of all, thinking strategically and curating at that level, being as focused as you can, and accepting that that will not work for everybody, by the way. So if you want to put 5 or 10 pieces of content up for a particular skill, as an example, there may be some people who don't have what they would like to have from within your platform, wherever you surface it through. I was comfortable with that after the volume of feedback if it was too much, and also knowing that actually there might be additional content which is available directly through the partner platform, and that's certainly an approach that we've taken. Come here for what we think is the really appropriate content for this skill within GSK, but actually if you want some more, you can go elsewhere. And also accepting that you're going to have a lot of content, frankly, that you've paid for that you're not surfacing through your platform, and that's okay as long as you're being purposeful around that, and you've had the conversations and you've done the research to show which is the right content to surface. I think that's absolutely fine. And obviously, again, that should be aligned to the appropriate skills. And I think the other bit is thinking from a human side of things. We're doing things strategically here, curating against those skills. There will be conversations between employees and line managers where actually they will be pulling out more specific content for a particular need. The human touch is exactly right. That might be when I have a conversation with line manager around my development for the year or longer term for my career. That's important, and we get to a point where we say, actually, so I need to look at some content to help me with the skill, then I need to apply it in a particular development opportunity or as part of my job, whatever it might be. That human touch, that conversation around development is absolutely key, because I think there's definitely been this proliferation of content that's been happening over the past year or two, and there's this view, I think this kind of Netflix view, which is certainly, I think, where I started to an extent, where throw a load of content out there and people will develop, and that is not the case. It does need the human touch, the interaction, whether that be line manager, coach, mentor, peers, whatever it would be. That's super, super important.
Yeah. So what I'm getting there is that if you want a focused experience and something that you can be confident when your people arrive, that they know that the organization values what they're doing, you need to make some hard decisions. Like, you need to basically say, well, some of this stuff we paid for, we can't use. Maybe they click off to it, and that's fine. That's fine. And some of your audience won't be served. And so then, because that's where I think a lot of this kind of Netflix approach, like chuck it all in there, comes from. It's like, well, we got 200 requests for the course on pottery last year, so it's justified. Let's put it in there. But obviously, if you aggregate that over an organization of 100,000 people, you suddenly get a ton of stuff that isn't very focused. So you've got to accept that there's some hard decisions there to be focused on that. And the other point I'm getting from this is that, I don't know, to me, Martin, this seems like a problem. You've got to crack it. You've got to get the content in the right shape, because if you don't, it's going to drag you down. But the reason you need to do it is there's something more important that you actually need to do after that, which is you need to then have those conversations. So you need to be somehow supporting the manager process throughout, everywhere. And don't get me wrong, I've heard this a lot. They expect that content to be lined up for them. They do expect that. But yet this is a whole nother step beyond that.
Yeah, I think in the context of probably, I guess, in your performance system is where you need to have a lot of that follow-up work anchored. So performance system whereby development conversations are happening, honest development conversations are happening. I think in some types of organizations and industries as well, it's actually creating the space for people to develop, whether that be looking at a video, attending a training course, having a development opportunity, creating space in their workday, right? So as people on manufacturing lines, that's a real big challenge for us to actually create space for them to develop. So yeah, I think it's all of
that. Yeah, absolutely. There's a couple of questions I want to capture in a discussion. By the way, I know we've been answering them through, like, things coming through about how do you keep the skill of content relevance and connect updated. That's actually very important because for all sorts of reasons. So we will capture that. But so we can get to the Q&A, let's kind of move on to the final point and the slide and the summary. So this final point, Martin. You've done all this work to understand the content, to focus it, to tag it, to get it into action. But we all know finding the route to measuring business impact, even if you know you're doing really good stuff and people are telling you, it is still difficult in very large matrix organizations, right? So what has your approach been to justifying the effort that's gone into skills, content, and skill development?
Yep. So we had, again, looking at this with different lenses, and I'll start with the strategic lens. I had a very specific problem to solve, which was around really clear feedback from employees that they couldn't find content and that the content wasn't relevant for them when they could find it. So actually, a lot of the metrics that I had were around qualitative feedback as part of our engagement survey, for example, which goes out twice a year, and also from a content consumption perspective as well. That was really the two key metrics, and that was really important for us. I think if I consider the other lens which I talked about earlier, which was a specific project or a piece of transformation, then there should be measures which are identified as part of that particular project. So what is the problem which is being solved or they're trying to solve? What are the metrics that underpin that problem? So that should form the basis of measuring the impact of the work that you've done.
Fantastic, thank you. That's useful. I want to jump on to addressing some of these questions, but I do also want to note that there's been a lot of discussion in the chat, and that we all know it, that content consumption doesn't equal skill development. That there's a lot more to it. But we also live in the real world, and let's be honest. The organisations we work in, that there are critical, you might even call it hygiene factors here, that aren't being done properly. So when you get people saying, I can't find anything on our systems and it's annoying and I have to go elsewhere, and then a management looks at a system that's cost hundreds of thousands of pounds and says people aren't using it, those are issues too, right? Like, do you agree with that? Like, that some of this work, like, yes, it might not kind of fill our hearts with passion and inspiration, but if we don't do this, we've got no platform to build on.
I absolutely agree, and what I think is really important here. So I think most organisations now have a really clear principle, not all, but most, certainly other HR L&D professionals I speak to, that we want individuals to take accountability for their own development. Now, we know that line managers have a key role to play in that as well. But I feel like as a development professional, there's an accountability on me to make sure that in the role that I'm playing, where I'm looking at skills strategically, I'm looking at the tools that are used for people to be able to access them, that I am making it as easy as possible for them to take accountability. And so that is exactly what you're saying. That is a hygiene fact. That shouldn't even be a consideration. It's 2021. People should be able to access content when they need it to help them develop, as well as the rest of the stuff that goes with it. But that's an absolute minimum.
Yeah. Absolutely, I really like the way you framed it. There's an accountability there, and it's not a get out of free card to say we're focusing on the stuff that really matters down the line, because you've got plenty of people who can't even get off the starting blocks, because if you're not doing that, if you're not focusing on these critical problems. That's quite an inspiring answer, actually. So we've got some time to answer some of these discussions. If you just want to, in a couple of sentences each, Martin, maybe sum up what's on this slide in terms of the recap of the main elements of your approach here.
Yeah, so I think first of all, the less is more, really, really important from certainly a content perspective in relation to the skills that the organisation chooses to focus on. Make it as easy as possible for people, and be really smart and sometimes a bit brutal around some of the choices that you make. I think the human element of it, everybody's been talking about it in the chat. It's not just about consuming a piece of content. It's really important that the human side of it, whether it be conversations you have with line managers, coaches, peers, etc., to introduce context for the development and introduce feedback into the loop, and also human from a curation perspective as well, and making sure that you're not just purely relying on machines to do that work for you, although it can definitely take you a lot further, a lot quicker. And also, there is a difference between looking at skills strategically and maybe in the middle looking at specific problems to solve around projects and transformations, and then looking from an individual perspective as well. And that individual, whether it be completing a task using Excel, as I still struggle with, or whether it's actually looking at something longer term around habitual development.
Great, fantastic. Thank you so much. Again, we of course it wouldn't be appropriate for me to finish without some kind of plug. So there is a Lightpaper about how we see the skills landscape written. It's a fantastic piece of work by your favourite L&D writer and HBR featured author, Mark Sanders. So definitely take a look at that. learn.filter.com LTDX. So I hope you enjoy that. But I might jump back actually to this summary slide, because it's probably more useful to look at than an ad for something else. So Andrew, did you want to come back in now and try and pick out the most important questions?
Thank you, gentlemen, and thank you. And can I just say, well done, Toby, for managing Martin's lack of internet for however long that will have to be. That was really well done. There's some brilliant questions. The conversation on chat's really, really interesting. So first question that I want to pick up on, it ties in with that last slide. This is from Grazina. And she says, in the face of AI and automation revolution, many jobs are being lost to robotics and computer systems, but new jobs might appear in other parts of the firm. Should companies be responsible for reskilling their workforce, or fire and hire new suitable candidates?
Well, I'm happy to take that one, Toby. So I think from an organisation perspective, and this one is real, right, for so many people and so many organisations, and it's really important stuff, because it's affecting people's lives, people's careers, as well as the companies themselves. So I think that organisations have a choice to make in this scenario, and what we know is there is a shortage of people with the right skills to do many of the new jobs. So there is absolutely an accountability on organisations to provide the framework, the scaffolding for people to reskill. That is really, really important. And that's not just for individuals, but for the companies themselves. And I think there's also choices to make around how that skills gap is addressed. If you reskill, do you choose actually to bring people in externally to buy it in? To borrow it in, to partner with other organisations? I think there's some of the classic choices that need to be made. But to be clear, there aren't enough people with the right skills out there. So the reskilling is so important to be able to do. Absolutely.
And that's been picked up in the questions by Greg as well. I see here assessment of skills and refreshing or progression of skills, an interesting area, and how do you handle that? And it's also been picked up by Louise as well. How do you complete an assessment on how well people have advanced their skills? Because there's no point assessing people to the standard from 2 years ago because the standard's changed.
Yeah, I mean, I think this whole area around skills assessment at scale. Do organisations know where the skills are in their company, especially for some of those bigger organisations? I think that technology is improving. We all know a number of platforms. We could probably name 2 or 3 off the top of our heads who are starting to address this and try to provide a platform which allows organisations to quickly understand where skills are. I don't think we're there yet. I really don't. I think it's a while away from being able to do that.
Yeah, and
I think there was a.
On that.
Sorry, Toby,
Andrew, my take on it is that we're still struggling with quite burdensome approaches to assessment that are probably too slow to give us a real-time picture. But at the same time, the alternatives that are coming in are probably too lightweight and don't give us enough. So there's a bit of a Goldilocks thing here. It needs to be more lightweight, but not as lightweight as it's become with people just clicking, yes, I've got this skill. It's got to be a bit more than that, but it's a problem I'm thinking about too.
It's interesting because it's been reflected by John May's picked up on this, and it also goes back to the previous session, which is about qualification of skills by badging in some form, and it's that badging piece and how the badging works with skills, which I think is actually quite complicated, and we haven't worked out what that means yet, I don't think.
Yeah, absolutely. Developing an agile way to quickly assess confidence at a level you're happy with, and then awarding something that the organization feels confident in. It needs to be a flexible solution because that level of social capital looks different in different organizations. One thing that struck me recently is if someone's saying, I know a bit about this skill, but I'm not confident in my results. Why are we asking them to complete a pathway or to do an assessment? We should just take that and say, right, cheers, mate. I'm glad you've said that. That's really useful for us to know. So there's an element, like I said, things still seem like quite heavyweight at the moment to even get someone to some basic recognition.
But it's interesting.
And again, sorry, go ahead. Sorry, Martin.
I was going to say so the bit going through my mind on this at the moment is I believe that we are still looking for technology to provide a silver bullet here, to be able to solve this for us. And in my mind, if I think really practically, from a hiring manager perspective, for example, and somebody comes to me and they've been badged with whatever skills they've got, however it's done. Until you actually have a conversation, like the human touch thing we talked about earlier, until you have a conversation with somebody and understand more about the context in which that skill was applied, I don't know that machines will ever actually fully solve that for us. And so I don't think that we should be looking for machines to solve it for us. They will take us to a certain point, but they will not solve it.
And that, I agree. That's been picked up by Deepak in the chat. You need a larger integrated platform. How much can be automated? I wouldn't trust any automation at the moment because it still can't work out how my spell check works properly. My autocorrect still doesn't work properly. And I think this is too big to be thinking about automating at the moment.
You're probably using all those big words, Andrew. You just need to tone it down a bit. That's what's the problem. Too many big words.
Absolutely.
It also comes back to that point earlier about is it a tool or is it a skill? We can be conscious of the skills they're focusing on and how they can improve that. Now that doesn't matter. That's been around for a long time and it's always been a challenge. And now it's a really sharp challenge. And if you don't change that behavior and they get those conversations changing, then the technology doesn't matter, as you say. Yeah.
Again, there's more questions. More questions are coming through. I noticed a question earlier on. Where's it gone now? From Natalia. What's your views on the importance of live versus popular plug-and-play e-learning? Can skills be truly practiced in an asynchronous way? I think there's a whole bucket full of stuff there about asynchronous, that I think is interesting. What are your thoughts on that?
I think to an extent we've covered the topic a little bit. I think that consuming some content isn't going to develop your skills necessarily. It might help you, as it does with me, to complete my pivot table. But in terms of longer term development, it needs a lot more than asynchronous learning for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, go ahead, Toby. Sorry.
I know, just to echo that, although there is nuance there, it does depend on the skill. Like some skills can be practiced in very elaborate simulations, like software programming, for example, to get to like amateur level. It can be done in certain tools.
Yeah. Cool. We're out of time. Thank you very much, gentlemen. The slides, will they be available afterwards?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Cool. Excellent stuff. The chat will remain open, and so there are still a few questions. So if I could ask you both at some point just to go back into the chat and just have a look and see what questions are there, continue the conversation. If people want to get in contact with you, Toby, Martin, how will they do that?
We didn't put contact details up. I think LinkedIn is probably going to be the fastest and easiest way. Is that the case for you, Martin? Yeah.
Yeah, it's certainly LinkedIn for me.
Excellent stuff. Thank you both very much. Really appreciate your time this morning. Thank you to everybody who's dialed in for this morning's sessions. Really, really interesting sessions, and I've been lucky to host again this morning. This afternoon, we start again, and it's Bilal who'll be doing the sessions this afternoon. But once again, thank you everybody for your time and your attention and the chat and conversation, and we'll see you again soon.
Thanks everyone. Everybody. Appreciate it. Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Bye.